Dude, you can play Tales of Eternia with the original Japanese audio!
やっべえ
So, most of you should be somewhat familiar by now with Namco Bandai's Tales series, which are absolutely incredible games, and you really need to play them, like, right now. But I doubt that all of you are aware that the series has actually been around for a really long time. It can trace its roots all the way back to the Super Nintendo, but it was only when it made the jump to 3D with Tales of Symphonia for the GameCube that it really started to become massively popular here in the West. So today I wanted to take a minute to raise awareness about my favorite entry in the series, which also happens to be its last and greatest 2D entry. And while I was at it, I also wanted to show you this really cool thing that the fan community has started doing with some older games. So strap yourselves in, and let's do this. The Tales series actually started all the way back in 1995 with Tales of Fantasia for the Super Nintendo. It was a rough attempt at making an action RPG that had classic RPG exploration and character growth elements fused with a fighting game or beat-em-up style combat system. This proved so successful that the company made it the backbone of the entire series, dubbing it the linear motion battle system. Now, Eternia is actually the third original entry in the series, but there's some downright Final Fantasy level confusion when it comes to its name. See, back when Tales of Eternia came out in late 2000, Mattel, the makers of He-Man, owned the rights to the word Eternia, which is the land that He-Man hails from. To prevent any possible legal issues, Namco changed the name of the game to Tales of Destiny 2 when they brought it to the West, setting it up as an unrelated spiritual sequel to the previous game, Tales of Destiny, even though the two games share no story-related connections and each takes place in its own completely separate world. This actually turned out to be a problem a few years later when Tales of Destiny received an actual sequel for the PS2, which, as a result of this whole debacle, ended up never making its way to the West at all. Later, Eternia would see an updated re-release on the PSP, but because of the same issues as before, this version ended up not being released officially in the US, though it was still released in other English-speaking regions, and fans who wanted one badly enough could still import a copy of the game, and it would play in a US version of the PSP. To avoid confusion, most fans refer to these games by their original Japanese titles, and that is what I intend to do in this video.
この子、何者なんだ?
おかしな色の髪、見慣れねえ服装、おまけに額には変な石。
The version of Tales of Eternia that we are playing today is actually a modified version of the PSP port of the game. If you'll notice, all of the voice work being played is actually in Japanese. However, Eternia was never released with a Japanese voice track option in the West. This is actually a specially modified game file called an Undub, in which fans have taken two copies of the game, the Japanese and English versions in this case, and replaced the English voice acting of the game with the Japanese voices from the original release, while still keeping all of the English text in the game intact. This effectively turns the game into a Japanese subtitled version of itself, and in my personal opinion, this is simply a straight-up superior way to experience the game's narrative. Not to hate on English dubs of Japanese products, but there's just no way to accurately translate the original Japanese inflections and intonations into English spoken words. It just doesn't work, no matter how hard they try. At least not for me, and apparently not for some people, because there's a pretty good subtitle following in anime fandom.
誰もいないみたいだぜ。
Now, before you get too excited, the only way to legally experience the game in this way is to do it yourself, which is to say you have to have your own copies of both versions of the game, back them up yourself to your computer, and then do the modification yourself. Only then will you be able to play it like this, and you will likely need an emulator to do so. Remember, do not attempt to play or modify for play on emulators any games that you do not already own a physical copy of. Doing so is illegal and could get you arrested. Forgotten Games does not condone the use of emulators to play games illegally. We are, however, interested in some of the more unique things that you can legally do with emulators, as long as you already own at least one copy of the game in question. I actually own copies of both the PS1 and the PSP versions of this game, and I went through the trouble of importing a Japanese copy just in case, so we are covered for this episode. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the Tales series' tradition of storytelling, it relies on several recurring themes. A colorful anime-like visual style, quirky but flawed characters who gradually grow to overcome their problems and develop depth as the game goes on, and a story that seems at first stereotypical, but which soon twists into something far more mature and complex. And Tales of Eternia hits all of those buttons perfectly. Your four main characters, Reed Herschel, Farah Orsted, Kiel Zybel, and Meredy, aren't bad people in any particular sense, but they all have serious flaws that make them quirky, yes, but which also hold them back or cause them a lot of personal pain. Reed is lazy and apathetic, Farah has a compulsory need to jump into situations and try to help without first looking before she leaps, and Kiel's intelligence and technical brilliance leads him to disregard any of the work and opinions of his own peers whenever it clashes with his own, which often gets him ostracized and punished for his lack of wisdom. All of the characters throughout the course of the story come to see the cost of their own flaws made real, whether in large or small ways, and all of them are forced to grow and change the way they approach life. The story, meanwhile, seems at first to simply be another excuse for a group of young people to have to save the world. But on the way, it ends up challenging you with overtones about the nature of authority, the cost of selflessness, the power of personal change and growth, and even questions the moral value of existence, sentience, and free will. The world of Eternia itself also bears noting as being a really interesting place to explore. Eternia is not one world, but two. More specifically, two entire planets, Inferia and Celestia, which are orbiting around a central point called the Orbis Barrier as they mutually orbit around their sun. The two planets haven't had any contact with each other for thousands of years, and more than that, they each have a different collection of elemental spirits guiding them, which leads them to have completely different climates, weather patterns, and natural resources. The primary cause of the game's trouble involves a powerful and malevolent entity trying to weaken or destroy the Orbis Barrier, an act which would unbalance the two worlds and cause their gravity to pull them together in a massive planetary collision known as the Grand Fall. Your party's original goal is to gather all of the Greater Kramels, elemental spirits that act as the overlords for their particular element, in an attempt to utilize their power to stop the Grand Fall. However, as the story goes on, you find that it's not quite as simple as that. But that's all I'm going to say for now. Needless to say, it's a more depthful story experience than it appears on the surface, and you shouldn't underestimate it. Tales of Eternia was pretty much the last 2D Tales game that Namco ever made, and I really think that they hit it completely out of the ballpark. Playing through it again, even after all these years, it makes me wish that they would still occasionally revisit the 2D style of presentation. Obviously, the game's battle system is the highlight of its mechanics, but saying that doesn't really do it justice. Battles in Eternia are fast, fluid, strategic, and have a great deal of technical depth to them. And yet, they never seem overwhelming. You're broken into the system so gradually and so efficiently that by the time you realize you're crazy good at it, you don't even realize you're crazy good at it. So, let me just go through some of the various systems that they have going on in this game. Your melee character's damage is primarily determined by their attack score, of course, but on top of that, Reed and Farah have another metric that helps. In Reed's case, he has slash and thrust levels, which you level up not by experience, but by how many times you actually use slash or thrust attacks in battle. These levels not only affect your damage per individual attack, but also affect the damage of your special techniques, and play a part in how quickly you unlock certain ones. Speaking of special techniques, each character has tons of them, all of which are unlocked by a combination of character level, slash and thrust levels, and in the case of some of them, rely on you having used more basic attacks a certain number of times. Also, the accuracy and damage of each special attack is affected by how many times you have used it. This is particularly notable in the case of Reed's swarm skills, which, if you use them often enough, will start out as mildly irritating attacks that can keep enemies at bay for a second, but will end up as an absolutely devastating onslaught that can seriously hurt even the toughest of bosses. My general rule during play was to try to use each skill at least 50 times, or if I really liked it, to try to get the counter up past 100. Also, when playing as Reed, every weapon in the game has its own sprite that shows up on your character in battle. This is not purely an aesthetic choice. Each weapon has its own custom hitbox, and the size and dimensions of your weapon's sprite will subtly affect the range, damage, and accuracy of your attacks, as well as what distance and angles are best to strike the enemy from in order to do the most damage or avoid missing. Later in the game, you can also get a few special weapons that can do interesting effects upon a critical hit, such as healing you, slowing the enemy for a second, or even auto-casting certain spells. Your mage characters are a bit more closely tied into the game's story, and as a result, result, they don't learn new spells just by leveling. Instead, as you progress through the game, you'll acquire the assistance of various Greater Kramels, and you unlock your spells by leveling them up. Each Greater Kramel has a spell that is unique to them, and whichever spellcaster is currently holding it will be able to cast that signature spell. But where it gets interesting is, they also get abilities or spells by fringing their power with the Kramels currently tied to the other spellcaster, not with the Kramels right next to them. Yes, I know that sounds weird, but it's not that hard to wrap your brain around once you've done it a couple times. This creates a system where you have to juggle which spells you want and which you are willing to pass on, because getting certain spells or buffs will make it harder to have other ones also available at the same time. You can't get them all, but you can probably optimize for whatever particular style you want. Each of your various Greater Kramels has a vitality score that the game keeps track of as you play. This vitality gauge goes up each time anyone casts a spell that corresponds to their element, and goes down each time someone casts a spell of the opposing element. The vitality gauge affects the casting time and damage of that Kramel's spells, but also, if you fill it completely, you'll be able to summon that Greater Kramel onto the battlefield. Obviously, summon spells do tons of damage and look awesome. But in Eternia, they can also cause interesting and useful status effects, or the Kramel's attacks can end up blasting, throwing, or otherwise moving your enemies around on the battlefield. One of the things I love most about Eternia is its sheer amount of side quests. The game is literally overflowing with extra content for you to explore and experience, and meaningful content too. I love me a good side quest. In fact, they're usually one of the things I find most exciting about a game. But that's only true if they matter, which is to say, they have to enrich my experience with the game somehow. They either have to give me something that is really cool and useful, expand on the game's story or world in a significant way, or help me understand and feel closer to the characters I'm exploring this world with. And the vast majority of Eternia's extra content will get multiple parts on that list at once. I normally list Majora's Mask as my ultimate example of a game with good side quests, but I have to admit, Eternia comes really close, and may even match Majora for sheer number of quality side quests. No, really, just check it out. There's a cooking system to collect the recipes and master with your various characters, a lens-finding quest that gets you unique items, 3 entirely optional Greater Kramels for you to track down and recruit, all of whom give you whole new sets of spells. There's 2 extra optional characters to recruit and train up, both of whom get their skills from other side quests instead of leveling. There's a bunch of hidden areas on the game's overworld maps where you'll find anything from consumables to new equipment or skills to new battle commands, which will change your party's AI on the fly. There's a battle arena for you to compete in that unlocks one of the game's coolest weapons. There's multiple extra dungeons which have bonus story scenes involved in them, and you get to upgrade your overworld ship, the Vaneltia, twice. No, seriously, the Vaneltia is the coolest, most engaging overworld transport ship I've ever experienced in any game in my entire life. By the time I got done pimping that thing out, I felt powerful just for having access to it, never mind my party members' abilities. There's also a bunch of cool secret content to discover, such as team-up skills, ultra-powerful cinematic attacks called Mystic Arts, several cameo appearances from previous Tales games, and New Game Plus mode. Dear God, New Game Plus mode. If I had to pick something to complain about with this game, it would be New Game Plus mode. Not because it's bad, it's just really tedious. Okay, let me explain. So, when you beat the game, after the credits and the epilogue and everything, you'll be given the option to save your game one final time. If you do, it will create a save file with a little tiny asterisk next to it. This is a New Game Plus save file, and loading it will start the game completely over from the beginning. No, really, from the very beginning. You don't get to keep your levels, equipment, items, skills, titles, characters, or anything. You are literally starting the game over from scratch. The only thing that's different is you unlock hardcore difficulty in the game's options menu. And in order to be able to do a bunch of the game's most awesome stuff, you need to then beat the game all over again, and you have to have fought at least one battle in hardcore difficulty. Doing so unlocks the game's secret dungeon and challenge boss, who is impossible, by the way, and the ability for your character to use many of their most powerful skills and spells. However, you still have to earn them the old-fashioned way, which means beating the game all over again and grinding endlessly to unlock these incredible attacks. This would be completely frustrating if there wasn't a way around it. To spare you the incessant headaches and let you focus on enjoying the game, there is a way to convert a normal save file into a New Game Plus save file without having to start all the way over. And here it is. Go through the game until you get to the final dungeon. Make your way through the final dungeon until you come to the point where you've cleared a whole bunch of elemental puzzles and unlocked a teleporter. Take the teleporter up to the next level, but do not go into the next room. Stop right there and save your game. Do not overwrite this save file, whatever you do. Beat the game as normal, enjoy the end credits and the epilogue, and when the game prompts you to save, create a new save file for your New Game Plus file. The game should then take you back to the main start menu. Load your New Game Plus save file and go through the game until you reach the first save point. Save, and then get into a random battle and allow yourself to die. When you die, the game will present you with several options. Choose load and load your original save file near the end of the game, the one that's not a New Game Plus file. When you load into that save file, check your options and you should have hardcore difficulty unlocked. Now, when you save next, your old save file should be reclassified as a New Game Plus file. Congratulations! You don't have to play the game all over again! Although it will still take you forever to unlock all of those mystic arts. Good luck, buddy! Now, other than that, there's really only two pieces of advice that I want to give you when it comes to this game. Firstly, don't miss the manual. It's not hard to find, just make sure that when you get to Regulus Dojo near the beginning of the game that you talk to everybody there. The manual is a plot item that lets you fight in manual mode, which gives you complete control of your characters instead of the game trying to help you. Getting this item will help you immensely, missing it will make the game much more frustrating. Secondly, as soon as you can, try to get the combo command. The combo command is an accessory that changes the way your skills work. It replaces the normal 4-slot system by assigning to each skill a Street Fighter-style button sequence that you can use to activate it at any time. This gives you complete and constant access to every skill your character has at all times, giving you tons of strategic options in battle, and letting you make the most of your character's combo strings. Now, it's not perfect. The game's input recognition isn't very robust, so you have to be really precise in your inputs, and that means you'll have to put in a lot of practice to make the most of this item. But for those of you willing to take the time to master it, the combo command can almost single-handedly make your character into an utter monster on the battlefield. And even if not, you should still get it just to try it. It's a really interesting way to play the game. Unfortunately, Eternia was the last game to feature the combo command, which is really sad because I thought it was a novel and interesting concept, and I would have loved to see it become a staple of the series. So, I don't like to give games a number score because there's too much subjective value in them. So instead, I'm going to try and make suggestions on whether or not you might find this game interesting. Obviously, if you've played other entries in the Tales series and liked them, then this one will probably keep you well entertained for quite some time. But for those of you who haven't played the series, then I'll say this. If you like Final Fantasy or you enjoy anime, then consider giving the Tales series in general a try. And besides that, anyone who likes old school beat-em-ups or Street Fighter games or even God of War style games, then you might find Eternia's battle mechanics interesting. So consider giving it a try, and when you're done, come back next time and see what other cool games we can discover on Forgotten Games. Also, if you liked this video, consider donating to my Kickstarter. I'd really like to produce more of these for you.